So the third topic I want to touch on as to why I believe regenerative agriculture could have a massive positive impact for society if implemented um, is economy, right? And this one will probably be the most controversial. I guess I'll just start by saying, like, I've come around to being more open to the ideas of socialism through this kind of change of heart and worldview that I've been going through over the last couple of years. And I know people have many, many hot takes and assumptions when they hear that word. But I want to separate, authoritarianism from economic systems like capitalism, socialism, etc. Right? Obviously, there were people who called themselves socialist throughout the last 100 years that implemented, you know, horrifically authoritarian societies because of that. But I think that's kind of an intentional propaganda used in the defense of capitalism, is to conflate socialism as an economic system with authoritarianism as a government. And those two things are totally separate. You can have an authoritarian or democratic capitalist system, an authoritarian or democratic socialist system. Same for communism, whatever, right? I absolutely am fundamentally against authoritarianism in every way, shape, and form. And as I mentioned in my last series of videos, Trump was been the huge wake-up call. It took way too long for me, but yeah, I don't think we need to continue the trend that is very obvious and undeniable in all of America right now, and really Western society, of consolidating power in more and more hands of, or consolidating power in the hands of fewer and fewer people, right? Which is the no doubt authoritarian trend we have seen across the West. I want to reverse that. And I think the economic system of socialism has a lot of promise. And we already have many socialist functions within our society, right? And funny enough, even conventional agriculture, I think you could very easily argue, already falls into the paradigm of socialism the way that we've been practicing it the last few decades. And that's because of the excesses that were caused from it being in a capitalist paradigm before that and maximizing profit over everything else. And I'll get into that now. So, what do I mean by that, right? So, the current conventional agricultural system literally is incapable of existing without massive taxpayer subsidies that are funded every few years in the Farm Bill, and then also ad hoc bailouts that happen pretty often over the last couple decades as well, such as one that just happened. I think it's a $12 billion bailout that Trump is giving to large-scale row crop commodity farmers, right? And now regenerative farmers will never see a dime of any of that because their products that they produce don't qualify for them. They're specifically for commodity farmers, right? And so we've been so successful in overproducing food that we've produced ourselves out of a capitalist economy in agriculture at this point, right? Like, it doesn't even make any sense when you talk about supply and demand. We massively overproduce the amount of corn and soy and wheat and other commodities that we need in this country, or to even export to the rest of the world, to the point that the value of them has completely fallen out. And so in order to keep farmers solvent, we have to give them massive taxpayer funded subsidies and bailouts, right? Like, that is definitionally socialism. And that's not even necessarily a socialism that I am in favor of, because we're subsidizing the wrong things, right? Because those practices are destructive to the environment and to human health and animal health and plant health at scale. So, I think the positive use of an economic system like that would be to incentivize people whether that's through subsidies or other means, to produce things that are beneficial for the environment and ecology and for plant, animal, human health. And that's where I think regenerative agriculture could play a huge role. One thing that a lot of people, especially if you're not in the ag industry, are probably not aware of is that the ag industry is already one of the few industries, maybe the only one in America, that has a massive part of its business done through cooperatives, right? So the business model of many of the largest agricultural companies in the world is actually a cooperative where the farmers own the business, right? Whereas many other industries are, most other industries are filled with corporations, right? Where nameless, faceless investors and shareholders can own the company even though they have no other stakeholder relationship. They might not even buy the product or the service. They don't work in the company. But yet they can have massive control and say over what it does, just managing it by spreadsheet for profitability from a computer, right? And that to me is, not an ethical way to run business, because, and I'll just, go straight into like that idea of the fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Like that idea is responsible for so many negative things we see in the world, because the most important shareholders of any business are the people, the customers who actually use the service or product the businesses produce, and the employees who work within it. Like, I'm sorry, those are fundamentally the people who are putting the most energy into that that business and its success every day of their life. And that's much more valuable than just throwing money at it and looking at a stock chart to hope that it goes up, and having no other influence or care about what happens and what the products are. Because that mindset that leads to all the negative downstream impacts we see when you don't see yourself as actually intimately part of the business. But I just put my money in and I expect that money to grow. That's it, by any means necessary, right? And a cooperative is so different in the way that it operates, because the farmers who own these companies are also customers of it, right? So they buy the products, they live in the communities, they sell their grain to the cooperative. The cooperative helps negotiate better prices for the farmers for both the grain that the farmers are selling and for the inputs they're buying. And the cooperative, helps just keep the influence of the business in the hands of the farmer themselves. The farmers get to elect the board, which gets to pick, the chief officers of the company. And so it's just a much more holistic business model that I think is much more ethical for any way to run a business. And it just so happens that the agriculture industry is filled with businesses like this, to the point that most farmers in America do business with a cooperative already, right? And that cooperative is, practicing mostly conventional agriculture. So I would still, want to see the change in their practices towards a more regenerative paradigm. But just the fact alone that they exist as a cooperative instead of a corporation is a huge advantage in helping agriculture take the right turn, because it is literally already set up for a grassroots movement within it. If you can convince the farmers that regenerative ag is better for a number of different reasons, then those farmers can change the cooperatives from within and retain control of that business amongst themselves, rather than having that control given to a faceless, nameless Wall Street shareholder that has no care about the business or the community that it exists within, right? And these are the kind of companies that I grew up working in. I've worked on both sides, in the corporate and the cooperative side, and it's just without a doubt the cooperative side is better. for all the reasons I just talked about. And it's also what my family, my brother, my dad have all worked in the cooperative side of ag retail. And so these are smaller businesses, medium-sized businesses that are sprinkled all around the country that sell inputs to farmers. Land O'Lakes is the largest one in the country, I believe. There's also some large dairy ones like Dairy Farmers of America. But Land O'Lakes, the butter company, they have a division called Winfield that I used to work for that is also sells inputs to farmers, and they work with the smaller cooperatives that are broken across all of America. And so yeah, Land O'Lakes, when you go buy that butter, yeah, I mean it's not regeneratively raised like I would prefer, but it is amazing and awesome that it truly is farmer owned, that business. And that's a thing that we should be happy about and should seek to expand more in other industries and other aspects of the economy, because that brings local control back to regular people. And this is one of the things that ag can be like a shining light, I think, for positive change if we can get regenerative agriculture to be adopted wide scale. I think that could start a real grassroots movement across other sectors of the economy and government that bring control back into the hands of regular people and stop this process of centralization. And that process of centralization we do see in farms, right? Like, because of how bad the economics are in farming, farmers are going out of business. Every year, more and more going out of business. They're consolidating to bigger and bigger farms and corporate farms. And I think regenerative agriculture it's not even I think, I mean, it provably is one of the few ways that you can make a living farming on a small acreage holding. And like, I personally know one of my biggest mentors in the regenerative ag movement in southern Indiana. They've been doing this for 30 years on 150 acres of multi-species stacked enterprises, using the principles of regenerative agriculture and soil health to produce high quality, nutrient dense food that they sell to their local community. They've been successfully doing that and raising multiple generations of a whole family on 150 acres for over 30 years. And that is completely and totally impossible and unheard of in conventional agriculture. And large scale conventional row crop agriculture, just growing monocrops of corn and soy and wheat and things like that, there is zero chance you could make it on 150 acres. You have to have thousands of acres to make it, especially now, and that trend just keeps getting worse. And so regenerative agriculture from an economic perspective just makes so much more sense for the farmer themselves. It's more profitable, it's more resilient, because not all of your eggs are in one basket, and if a crop failure happens, then you might be out completely. And that also brings up the topic of crop insurance, which is another thing that's massively subsidized by taxpayers every year for when crop failures happen. And regenerative agriculture gives people the ability to be self-sufficient, resilient, and not need taxpayer money at all, right? So this, like specifically this farmer I'm talking about in southern Indiana, they don't see any of those subsidies that are given to large-scale conventional growers whatsoever, because they don't grow the commodities that those guys grow, which you have to grow in order to qualify for the subsidies, right? Now they might get a grant here and there to like do some fencing work or do some water line work, but like fundamentally their business exists because it is profitable every year. And those things are like seen as bonuses if you can get them those grants. But conventional agriculture would literally fundamentally fail if it wasn't for the subsidies given to the Farm Bill and the bailouts that even have to come out on top of that when things get bad, like we've seen recently. So that's what I want to kind of close with here on this topic of economy when it comes to regenerative agriculture, is that most people probably don't realize that it's more primed than any for like a true grassroots revolution, how it operates, because it already does just definitionally follow a lot of kind of socialist ideas in terms of a lot of cooperatives operate in the industry where ownership is mutually shared amongst the customers and employees who use the business and the farmers. And there's already the paradigm set, not necessarily I think this is good, but it's just factually true that we socialize the risk of agriculture through subsidies and bailouts using taxpayer dollars. Now, I think we could do a heck of a lot less of that actually, because regenerative ag is provably more resilient and efficient way to grow food, and so much less subject to failure, so much more resilient. I don't think you would need those subsidies or bailouts, but maybe you could still, give grants and things like that to incentivize people as they transition, because that is going to be, that's a big deal. And the transition, just like with anybody, when they, have new ideas, that starts with the person first. It starts with, in their own mind. The famous quote that, the revolution will not be televised, right? Because it happens internally first. And that will be the biggest challenge, right? The biggest hurdle is that most farmers are fundamentally conservative. They're massively Republican. And it's very sad. And I was absolutely part of this. Like, I don't judge anyone at all. I want to make that very clear, because I was in the exact same mindset. But like, they literally vote against their own interests. And once again, not even saying that if you didn't vote Republican and you voted Democrat, that would solve all the issues, because I don't think that's true. But like, we need fundamental grassroots change, and we need to build parallel systems that outcompete the consolidated industries that exist in all aspects of society. And I think agriculture could be a major grassroots positive movement, that starts this in the right direction, because the production of food is fundamental to every aspect of civilization. Everything is downstream of that ability. And so if you can do that and capture, that is a goal, that is a stated goal of techno-fascists, is to capture food production and buy as much land as possible. That's why you see billionaires like Bill Gates. He's now the largest landowner in the world. And they know that it is one of the few resources that is truly limited. And so if they can capture enough of it, then they will completely own food production. And that's just another major nail in the coffin of individual sovereignty, and communal sovereignty, of people being able to choose what they want in life and be in control of their own existence. So if we can take the other fork in the road and help people understand and help farmers understand that, like, this method of farming is not only better ecologically and ethically, but will literally make you more economically solvent every year that you do it, and resilient, and not needing external input and not needing external money and bailouts and subsidies, I think it has a massive opportunity to, push society in the direction we want it to go, from an economic standpoint.